Hello, everybody, and welcome to Mambel Technology Group. This is a new edition, and if you are here for the first time, I would advise you to go and check our website on Mambel Technology Group. We have a lot of interesting videos that we've worked on. And before you watch this video, I would suggest that you watch our previous videos on how to create virtual machines, on how to create clusters and how to add virtual machines to your clusters. We went as far as talking about virtualization, the concept of virtualization, and we saw how we could enable virtualization in the Windows operating system and create our virtual machine. So, in today's video, we will be talking about the concept of high availability and disaster recovery. If you are a DBA or you are a technical person out there in the field, you must have heard of this concept in one way or the other. Now, for the SQL Server database administrators or database administrators in general, this is a common concept that everybody has come across or has probably heard. But what is high availability and disaster recovery solution? And if you must know, these are two different concepts. High availability is one concept, disaster recovery is another concept. So, high availability and disaster recovery is a combination of these two concepts, which gives um, a possibility to have more redundant data in your environment, especially when dealing with critical and mission critical data. It's very important to understand this concept in such a way that um, you can leverage these technologies to keep your business running. Maybe whatever company you're working for, you can leverage this technology and help your management keep their applications and their business always up and running. So, in our previous video, we saw how to create always on availability group. And as you can see from this, okay, as you can see from this diagram on this the whiteboard, you can see this is a solution. This is our high availability. It means we have configured node 1, as you can see here, and node 2 in an always on availability group. And in our previous video, we talked extensively about always on availability group and how to set them. We went as far as talking about the prerequisite, and we saw how you could set up your always on availability group. So I would suggest, if you're here for the first time, to go on our channel and watch how to set always on availability group in SQL Server 2019 on Windows Server 2019 operating system. So here we have our node 1. You can see the IP address. We have node 2. And these two VMs are set up in an always on availability group. So just for to refresh our mind, always on availability group is a technology that was introduced in SQL Server 2012. And I think it started with the enterprise edition, where you could have a group of databases that will fail over together to a secondary replica in case of a disaster or in case of something that happens to the availability group. So in our case here, node 1 is the actual primary and it's communicating with node 2. So if something were to happen with our availability group here, which is this one, then what is going to happen, depending on the availability mode you have set, synchronous or asynchronous, you can definitely have an automatic failover, or you can manually trigger a failover from this node 1 to node 2. So now, if you look at the node 1 VM here, you will see that there is a database that is isolated here. This was just to explain and expose the difference between a database that can be on the same server with the other databases that are part of an availability group. So, except a database is part of an availability group, it may not fail over. So if a disaster was to happen and let's say node 1 completely crashes or the entire server goes down, only databases within the availability group will fail over, as you can see with the 4 databases represented on node 2 here. Now the isolated database definitely will not fail over, and that is definitely going to cause a downtime. So if it's a critical database, you may want to add it to an availability group. And that is a reason why we have always an availability group, because of the critical nature of the data we are managing. Many companies work with data uh, um, belonging to hospitals, hospital data, bank data, government data. So, and most of these companies do not actually accept downtime. And if at all they do accept the downtime, it might be really a short downtime. So, both the availability group databases communicate with each other with what is known as a heartbeat. Right, they talk to each other, and you can see we have our domain controller right here, which manages all this. So this pink area represent our primary data center. That is why I had to make a difference with this other light green area. So this is our primary data center. So in our HHDR solution for today, we're going to combine always on high availability and lock shipping. You may watch our video on lock shipping, how it works. So how does always on work? Let's take, for example, I'm going to call this our user here, Erica. Erica is trying to make a connection to a production database. And guess all these databases are production databases. Erica is trying to make a connection to a production database. Now, availability group work with the help of the listener. The listener is basically a computer object with an IP address and a name that routes connection to the primary or the secondary replica depending on what the connection intent is doing. And we talked extensively on this in our previous video about uh, routing the read-only connection and the read-write connection. So assuming Erica was trying to read data from a database, let's say one of these databases, what the listener does, if the always on availability group is set to accept read-only routing, which means we have tried to load balance our workload between the primary and the secondary, because in always on availability group, all the read or all the write operation will always direct to the primary replica. Whichever replica is the primary will always accept write operations. But for the purpose of not having an inactive node or having an active passive node, right? You don't want this node to be passive. You want this node to be doing something. And in this case, we are directing our read operations to the secondary. That is why you can see this red arrow, which indicates read operations coming in and are directed. And this read operation will only be effective or only be directed to the secondary node if in the connection string, the application intent has been specified to be read only. You need to pay special note to that. If you don't specify the application intent to be read only, then it might go to the primary replica to read data, and that will be overworking the primary replica. So now, how do we combine always on and lock shipping? In this diagram, you can see the database represented with the red or the oxblood color, whatever color it appears in your eyes. This is our database that is most critical database among every other databases in the availability group. So the combination here is that we will use this database and set it with lock shipping to lock ship transactions from this primary data center to our secondary data center right here. And how does this work? Now, the setup is very tricky and it's a little bit, you have to pay attention to it. If not, you might miss it. For this to be able to work, it means that our database is first of all participating in always on availability group. And secondly, it's participating in lock shipping. Now, for you to be able to achieve this, let's assume there was a disaster on the node 1, which is a primary replica, and everything failed over to node 2. Is your lock shipping still going to be working? I doubt so, unless you follow the proper setup. it might not work. So for you to be able to have this proper setup, the backup preference in setting up your always on availability group has to be set to primary. Remember, when setting up always on availability group, you have the possibility to choose which replica you want to be running your backup and what is the backup preference, right? So if you want to associate this always on availability group to log shipping, then definitely the primary condition is that your backup has to be always running to the primary. Why? This is because if you set your backup to be running on the secondary replica, and we assuming that this is a secondary replica, if there is something if something happens and this secondary replica changes role with the primary and it becomes the primary, then your backup may fail, right? Your log shipping job may fail. Or if you choose a preferred replica on which your backup job is running, once it changes role, your backup will fail. Second thing to note, first I've talked about the backup. Second thing to note is to create the backup job. Remember, log shipping has three job steps. First, it backs up the database. Second, it copies the backup file to a shared location where both the primary data center or the servers participating in the log shipping and the secondary server have access to. So definitely there is a shared location somewhere in between these two where the backups that are taken in the primary data center are copied to, and this read-only database that is in the secondary replica copies those backup and apply it to the database here. Now, the backup. So in log shipping, you have to make sure, since backup is going to be running continuously, which means it's going to be running a backup job. And remember, every jobs are created on the MSDB. It's run by SQL Server agent. And each instance of SQL Server has its own system databases. It means if SQL Server is installed here, it has the master, the MSDB, the model DB, the temp DB of its own, which is actually different from this one. So if you set your log shipping between node 1 and this secondary data center for your disaster recovery, it means that if there is a failover, node 1 will become secondary, and if your backup wasn't set properly, then node 2, which will resume the role of the primary, will not be able to send or backup files to this secondary data center, and it will fail. That is why in the first step of creating log shipping between these two, first you have to make sure that your backup is always running on the primary. Always running on the primary. It means whatever node becomes a primary, the backup job will be running from there. Secondly, you need to set up, when you're setting up the backup job, you need to set up a verify, right? An availability group verify step in the job steps. That is going to be the first step in the job step. So, which means that if node 1 is the primary, you have two job steps. The first step is SQL Server will check on node 1. Are you the current primary replica? Are you the host of the current primary replica? That is the first step in the job steps. And if this is validated, if it says yes, I am the primary, it will move on to the second step to take the backup job, which therefore will be written in the shared location and from there copied to this logship database. So that happens through your SQL Server agent and in your job steps. It means your node 1 is going to have two job steps. The first job step to verify the primary role, and the second job to execute the backup job. And you will create the same job here. You don't have to disable them. So if you create your backup job here, you have to script out the backup job and recreate it here so that each should be synced with this primary replica, and each should be on your MSDB2. So each of these instances will have two jobs. The first step will be to verify which node is the primary replica, and that is done through the listener. The listener is very smart. It understands because it communicates with these guys through the heartbeat, right? Each time it pings any of these guys and tries to understand which server is up and running at what time and which server is the primary. So if you try, to connect to any of the primary, the listener, knowing fully well that node 1 is a primary at this time, will route your right connections, if at all it's a right connection, to the primary. But if you've not also set up the read only routing, then everything will probably be going to the primary, right? I hope this concept is very clear and is very straight to the point. Always on availability group plus log shipping gives you an HADR solution. And the benefit of this is that in as much as these two servers are in an availability group, it may happen through human mistakes or through natural disaster that the entire primary data center goes down. And knowing that you have this database that is very critical and that you have set in to lock ship the transactions to a secondary data center, if this primary data center goes down, then you can always rely on this secondary data center to bring your system up. Now, in this our video, I just represented just one database, but there can be a situation where you can have multiple databases, but be mindful that lock shipping is only one database at a time. So instead of doing this technology where you have to, have multiple databases lock shipping to the secondary data center, then I would suggest you rather go with another concept, which is called distributed availability group. And that is beyond the scope of this class. We would see distributed availability group in our upcoming videos. So I hope this video was clear enough. The next video, we will be creating always on, and we will be adding lock shipping to it, and I will walk you through the steps how to set them. We will test a failover from the primary to the secondary, and we will check our backup if they are still running and being applied on the secondary data center. Then we will fail back from the secondary to the former primary and see if it still works. And if everything is good, then you just succeeded in creating an HADR solution, which is very, very important in your career as a database administrator or as any person working with crucial and critical data. You have to always make sure that your data is up and running. Now, I know some people will want to set this setting, but using the cloud as a secondary data center. So it doesn't really matter if your disaster recovery solution is pointing towards the cloud or somewhere still on-prem. So look at this like a primary data center in Texas and another secondary data center somewhere in Virginia. So if this one goes down, you always rely on your data center in Virginia to have your critical data, and you can now repoint your application. Erica's application can now be repointed on this database to continue your workload. Thank you very much. I hope you like this video. Please share and subscribe. You can also click on the notification bell to get notified each time we have a new video loaded on our channel. Please, thank you very much, and watch out on the next video. I will walk you through setting up always on and lock shipping. Thank you, Mambet Technology Group.